Hi everyone, my name is Abhuraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhay. Bombing numbers made them incredibly troublesome. Worse still, the fairy dragon revealed another terrifying fact. These weren't ordinary skeletons. Dragonfangs were immortal soldiers. They would continue regenerating forever until the duty left behind by their creator was fulfilled. Smiling despite the situation, Theo welcomed the challenge anyway. He leaped into the treetops, forcing the endless horde to chase after him while cutting down as many as possible. Eventually, however, he realized brute force wasn't accomplishing anything. Every enemy he defeated simply regenerated moments later. Watching Theo struggle, Griffin reluctantly offered some advice. Since Kriemhild had originally been human, perhaps Theo only needed to obtain ownership of the relic from him, rather than destroying every dragonfang. Theo immediately dismissed the suggestion. If Kriemhild had somehow survived for countless ages inside the dungeon, then he was hardly human anymore. Griffin became annoyed, regretting wasting useful advice on someone so stubborn. Just then, the system interrupted their argument with a brand new notification. Theo literally clamped Griffin's beak shut so he could concentrate on reading it. According to the message, the dungeon itself was the final gift left behind by Leviathan. For the hero Kriemhild, Theo's new objective was to reclaim ownership of that gift from its current owner. Reading between the lines, Theo reluctantly admitted Griffin might actually have been right all along. While continuously swinging through the forest using vines to stay ahead of the pursuing dragonfangs, Theo activated hatchling synchronization to maximize his perception. His senses instantly sharpened to superhuman levels, allowing him to process every movement around him. That's when he noticed something unusual. Among the endless undead chasing him, one dragonfang carried a noticeably different aura, even stranger. While the others relentlessly pursued Theo, this lone skeleton suddenly turned around and ran away instead. Theo immediately understood that this odd one was the real target. Bursting forward with incredible speed, he easily caught up before unleashing his fastest technique, Lightning Dragon Flash. Black lightning trapped the fleeing dragonfang inside a cage of electricity before detonating in a devastating explosion that completely obliterated everything within range. As soon as the unique dragonfang was destroyed, another system notification appeared. Theo had successfully collected one piece of Kriemhild's remains, the hero's third cervical bone. The good news was that he finally understood how to clear the dungeon. The bad news was that he now needed to collect 206 separate pieces scattered throughout the dungeon. One bone down, 205 to go. Back in the real world, dark storm clouds rolled across the skies as a mysterious fleet quietly docked at the floating archipelago under the cover of heavy rain and thick fog. Port workers hurried aboard to unload the ships, but what they found froze them in horror. Every single crew member had been massacred. Blood covered the deck from end to end, and not a single survivor remained. The only person to calmly step off the ship was a lone man who welcomed the thick fog, noting that it would make his mission much easier. Hearing that the spies he had planted inside Black Skull had failed to recover, Bamon barely bothered him. Whether the dragon's laying sword was in Theo's hands or someone else's no longer mattered. As far as he was concerned, the floating archipelago had already fallen into Troivin's grasp. The man revealed himself as Noel, the ninth lord of the Troivin clan, who had personally arrived to finish what his subordinates couldn't. Before long, massive explosions echoed throughout the islands, waking countless civilians from their sleep as terrified citizens looked toward the horizon. They watched the great merchant, the ancient protector that had safeguarded the floating archipelago for centuries, collapsed before their eyes, signaling the beginning of yet another disaster. Back inside the relic dungeon, Theo finally completed his relentless bone hunt, collecting all 206 pieces of Kriemhild's remains. The moment the last fragment was gathered, the system prompted him to witness the memories engraved within the hero's bones. As the world around him faded into darkness, Theo wondered what the legendary hero was truly like. Instead of meeting the fearless warrior history described, his consciousness was pulled into a memory of a carefree child crossing a tropical island with a basket of food in hand. Every day, the cheerful girl eagerly made her way to a secluded cave to visit her closest friend, Levi. Hidden inside the cave lay the legendary dragon-slaying sword, Balmon, which housed its guardian, the mighty Leviathan. The enormous sea dragon constantly scolded the child, insisting she addressed him properly as Leviathan, guardian of the primordial dragon's relic. Even the proud Ragnar clan showed him more respect than this little girl ever did. Kriemhild simply laughed and continued calling him Levi, because it was easier. Eventually, the grumpy guardian gave up trying to correct her. Whenever they shared meals together, Leviathan would shrink into a tiny form to conserve energy while listening to her endless stories. Day after day, year after year, Kriemhild returned to the cave, chatting endlessly about her adventures while Levi pretended to be annoyed. Deep down though, he secretly looked forward to every visit, trapped inside Balmung. For ages, those conversations slowly became the happiest part of his endless existence. Without realizing it, the lonely guardian had come to treasure the cheerful girl more than anything. One day everything changed. Instead of hearing Kriemhild's usual energetic greeting, Levi smelled fresh blood. The young girl stumbled into the cave, barely alive after suffering fatal wounds while desperately trying to reach her only friend. Behind her came soldiers of the Empire, who had invaded her peaceful village and slaughtered its people without mercy. Before she could reach safety, one of the soldiers grabbed her by the hair and viciously stabbed her again, treating her as nothing more than a worthless savage. Laughing cruelly, the man prepared to abuse the dying girl even further. That was the final straw. Consumed by overwhelming rage, Leviathan abandoned his sacred restraints and erupted from the relic. The cave exploded apart as the colossal sea dragon unleashed his fury upon the invaders. Outside, Kriemhild's village had already fallen under imperial occupation, with terrified civilians being threatened and burned alive if they refused to obey. Then the sky darkened. A monstrous dragon descended upon the battlefield, carrying the wounded Kriemhild on top of his head. With a single, overwhelming assault, Levi annihilated every imperial soldier in sight. At that moment, Kriemhild unconsciously awakened the ability to wield Balmung itself. The surviving soldiers desperately tried to shoot her down, but every arrow and spell was effortlessly blocked, as Leviathan protected both her and the remaining villagers with powerful barrier magic. When the battle finally ended, the Empire's army had been wiped out completely, although the village itself had been reduced to ashes. After everything was over, Kriemhild tearfully apologized for drawing the dragon-slaying sword. She believed she had ruined everything by taking the weapon meant for some future chosen hero. Levi gently reassured her that none of it mattered. In fact, he believed things had turned out exactly as they should have. For the very first time in his endless existence, he had acted according to his own heart, rather than blindly obeying the primordial dragon's orders. If protecting Kriemhild's smile meant abandoning his sacred mission, then he would gladly accept that sin, using barrier magic once more. Levi introduced Kriemhild to the surviving villagers as their hero, and the people praised her for saving them from the Empire's cruelty. Unfortunately, word of the Empire's humiliating defeat quickly reached the Emperor himself. Unwilling to stain his perfect record, he dispatched the royal guards to crush the rebellion once and for all. Unlike the ordinary soldiers before them, the royal guards managed to achieve what seemed impossible. They successfully restrained the mighty Leviathan, but they did so through utterly despicable means. Rather than overpowering the sea dragon directly, they captured the innocent villagers and threatened to execute every last one of them if Levi continued resisting. They then forced Kriemhild to reveal the secret needed to stop. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pi grow naturally. The Guardian forever knowing there was no other way to save everyone. Levi calmly begged her to comply. As a relic guardian, death simply meant returning to an eternal slumber. The remaining magic stored inside Balmung would be enough to seal him once more. Compared to the lives of Kriemhild and her people, his own existence meant nothing. With tears streaming down her face, Kriemhild climbed onto the head of her oldest friend while holding Balmung and trembling hands. Unable to let her shoulder such a burden alone, Levi manipulated the surrounding water to guide her movements, forcing her to carry out the painful task herself. He confessed that from the moment he'd abandoned his sacred duty to save her, he had already accepted this ending. Even though the years they spent together were incredibly short compared to his endless lifespan, they had become the happiest memories he had ever known. He begged Kriemhild never to blame herself, because everything he did was his own choice. Then, using her own hands, Kriemhild sealed her beloved friend, as Leviathan slowly fell into slumber. The royal guards celebrated their victory, laughing at the tragic ending they had engineered without lifting another weapon. Their triumph lasted only seconds. In one final act of defiance, Leviathan unleashed the last of his remaining power. A colossal storm swallowed the sky as an enormous tidal wave crashed down upon the Imperial army, drowning every single soldier. At the same time, the raging waters carefully curved around the innocent villagers, leaving them completely unharmed. The sea dragon then performed one final miracle. The land beneath Kriemhild's feet was ripped from the ocean floor and lifted high into the sky, creating what would one day become the floating archipelago. Watching everything unfold, Theo finally understood the true origin of the islands. Kriemhild had never been some glorious dragon-slaying hero. She was simply an innocent girl caught in humanity's cruelty, who formed an unforgettable friendship with a lonely relic guardian. The vision slowly began fading until Kriemhild herself approached Theo. Even after all these years, her lingering soul still carried overwhelming guilt for preventing Levi from fulfilling the duty he was born to protect. Now, at long last, she had the chance to correct that mistake. Smiling gently, Kriemhild willingly relinquished ownership of Balmung and entrusted the ancient dragon relic to Theo. Her only wish was that he could bring happiness to the stubborn sea dragon who had sacrificed everything for her sake. Theo respectfully accepted the relic and assured her there was no need to feel guilty anymore. Levi had already found true happiness simply by meeting her. Those few precious years they spent together had given the lonely guardian more joy than countless centuries of blindly serving his purpose ever could. Hearing those heartfelt words finally lifted the burden Kriemhild had carried for so long. With a peaceful smile, her soul quietly faded away, leaving Balmung and its future entirely in Theo's hands. Back in the real world, the guards hurriedly surrounded the ruins of the collapsed colossus, inspecting the damage and making sure the remaining structure wouldn't cave in any further. Then, without warning, a lone figure slowly rose from the mountain of shattered stone. At that exact moment, the dark storm clouds overhead parted, allowing rays of sunlight to shine directly onto the man standing atop the rubble. In his hand rested the legendary dragon-slaying sword, Balmung. The stunned guards instantly recalled the ancient depictions of Kriemhild carrying that very blade. To them, there was only one explanation. The savior of legend had returned. Word spread through the floating archipelago like wildfire, and before long, people everywhere began calling Theo the second coming of Kriemhild, the hero destined to save their sinking homeland. While hope spread among the common people, panic gripped those truly responsible for the archipelago's downfall. The three merchant families controlling the floating archipelago secretly gathered beneath the city for an emergency meeting. Waiting for them was Noel, the ninth lord of the Troiven clan. The wealthy clan heads immediately demanded answers. According to the agreement, the dragon-slaying sword was supposed to remain under Troiven control, yet somehow a complete outsider had appeared in public, wielding Balmung, instantly winning the hearts of the people. Citizens were already rallying behind him, believing Kriemhild herself had returned. If that continued, the influence the three shipping clans had carefully preserved would disappear overnight. After all, they had willingly handed Balmung over to the Troivens years ago in exchange for keeping their luxurious positions. Hearing their complaints only annoyed Noel. One arrogant merchant even dared to question the Troiven clan directly. In the blink of an eye, Noel casually raised one hand and reduced the man to nothing more than a cloud of blood and flesh. Silence immediately filled the room. Noel coldly declared that he hadn't come to comfort greedy pigs. The civilians meant nothing to him. They were insects that could be crushed whenever convenient. In truth, he despised the merchant clans just as much as everyone else. They were traders who sold out their own homeland for profit, and if they had simply followed orders properly, none of this chaos would have happened. Another merchant nervously pointed out that the Troivens themselves depended heavily on the archipelago's resources. Noel stepped directly into the man's face, making it crystal clear that no further opinions were welcome. His only order was simple: retrieve Balmung. Whether they succeeded or died, trying made no difference to him. Such an important mission to the incompetent merchants was wise. Noel admitted he'd rather recover the sword personally, but a far greater threat was approaching. Intelligence had just confirmed that one of Ragnar's 9 dragons, the mighty hegemony dragon, was on his way to the floating archipelago. Dealing with that monster took priority over everything else. Meanwhile, outside the ruined monument, nearly every citizen of the floating archipelago had gathered to catch a glimpse of the mysterious swordsman. Countless voices chanted Cream Hill's name just as their ancestors had done centuries ago. Theo had known Cream Hill was deeply respected, but even he hadn't expected devotion on this scale. Ironically, he was probably the only person still alive who actually knew the truth. Cream Hill had never been a divine hero. She was simply an ordinary girl forced into an impossible tragedy. Still, Theo decided there was no reason to destroy the people's hope. One desperate citizen stepped forward and pleaded for help. Ever since the Troivans arrived, the islands had slowly been sinking, while residents were forbidden from escaping. The people begged the supposed reincarnation of Cream Hill to save both them and their homeland. Understanding what the moment required, Theo raised Balmung high into the air and made a solemn vow. He promised that his sword would protect the floating archipelago and bring salvation to everyone living there. His declaration instantly reignited hope throughout the crowd. After quietly slipping away from the celebration, Theo was greeted by an unusual young priest named Marty, accompanied by several shrine maidens, introducing himself as the caretaker of Cream Hill's temple. Marty respectfully pledged that the temple would serve Theo from that day forward. Following the priest, Theo crossed the sacred bridge leading to the ancient sanctuary, while thousands of citizens watched from behind. Once they entered the temple alone, Marty revealed something even more surprising. Theo's arrival had been foretold generations ago. The temple itself had been preserved solely to welcome him. As they walked deeper through the temple halls, Marty showed Theo an ancient necklace, said to have once belonged to Cream Hill herself. The system immediately identified it as an enchanted magical accessory and, more importantly, a gate connection key. It would become the essential item needed to reach the sleeping sea dragon beneath the islands. Feeling slightly guilty after receiving such reverence, Theo finally confessed that he wasn't actually Cream Hill's reincarnation. To his surprise, Marty calmly smiled and revealed that he had known Theo's true identity from the very beginning. He knew Theo was Theo Ragnar, and he understood that Balmung was an ancient dragon relic, capable of awakening only in the hands of a Ragnar. Yet despite knowing all of that, Marty still insisted on treating him as Cream Hill's successor. The temple's guardians had preserved the true history of Cream Hill for generations. They knew she had never been a mythical hero, but rather a kind-hearted girl forced to wound the friend she loved most. Because the reluctant guardian Leviathan himself had accepted Theo as Balmung's new master, the temple believed he deserved every ounce of respect once shown to Cream Hill. Eventually, they arrived before an enormous staircase descending endlessly into the depths beneath the floating archipelago. Marty'd explained the final step. Theo only needed to throw Cream Hill's necklace into the waters below. Doing so would awaken the hidden gate leading directly to the sea dragon. The necklace would also allow Theo to breathe and move freely underwater. Entrusting all of the archipelago's hopes to Theo, Marty wished him success. Theo accepted the responsibility without hesitation. Outside the temple, thousands of citizens continued praying for Cream Hill's protection and for the salvation of their homeland. Their peaceful vigil didn't last long. The three merchant clans suddenly arrived with armed soldiers and immediately declared Theo a criminal. According to their fabricated investigation, the so-called hero was nothing more than a terrorist who had stolen the dragon's laying sword. They ordered every civilian to disperse immediately. Leading the operation was Umberto Spinol, head of the Spinol shipping clan. Although Antonio shared his surname, the two men couldn't have been more different. Umberto, before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Knew his reputation would suffer after attacking innocent civilians, but he no longer cared. If he failed to recover Balmung, Newell would kill him anyway. Faced with that choice, sacrificing his own people seemed like the easier option. He ordered his kill squads to cut down anyone refusing to leave. While bloodshed erupted above, Theo continued descending the seemingly endless staircase beneath the temple. After what felt like an eternity, his foot finally touched cold sea water. He had reached the hidden chamber, carefully taking out Cream Hill's necklace. Theo gently tossed it into the water. A tiny ripple spread across the surface before rapidly expanding into a massive whirlpool. The sea itself acknowledged the key. Moments later, the swirling current transformed into a magnificent underwater gateway. Without hesitation, Theo stepped through. Instantly, he found himself standing at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by vibrant marine life drifting peacefully through the deep sea. Gripping Bamung tightly, Theo searched for any sign of the sleeping Leviathan. Before he could begin, an overwhelming wave of killing intent washed over him. Something enormous was circling him, beneath the dark waters. Then he finally saw them. An entire army of starving sea serpents had silently surrounded him from every direction, methodically cutting off every possible escape route. They stared at Theo like predators eyeing their final meal, looking at the massive swarm closing in around him. Theo simply smiled. No matter how terrifying these monsters looked in their own territory, they still weren't enough to make him back down. Up on the surface, the head of the Spinola family, Umberto, officially gave the order to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. The terrified citizens quickly banded together, refusing to abandon the temple or the hero they believed had come to save them. They desperately tried to reason with the armed soldiers, insisting there was no proof that Theo or the temple had committed any crime, but their pleas were completely ignored. Just as the situation was about to spiral further out of control, the temple's high priest, Marty, stepped forward with a commanding voice that brought everyone to a halt. Furious at the baseless accusations, Marty declared that the men he personally escorted into the sacred sanctuary was none other than Cream Hill's chosen successor, and he swore upon the honor of every priest who had protected the temple for generations that his words were true. Rather than accusing the temple of harboring terrorists, Marty argued that it was the three merchant clans who owed everyone an explanation. He publicly exposed Umberto for secretly allowing Trovan mercenaries to enter one of the holiest sites in the floating archipelago. The crowd instantly connected the dots. The very people responsible for stealing the dragon-slaying sword had returned once again, this time trying to silence anyone who opposed them. The citizens' fear immediately transformed into fury, and what began as a tense standoff exploded into a full-scale riot. Devout followers of the temple linked arms and formed a human barricade, willingly putting their own lives on the line to protect the man they believed would save their homeland. Umberto had expected the frightened civilians to scatter the moment weapons were drawn, but he badly underestimated the strength of their faith. Even some of his own soldiers urged him to back down, arguing that retreating and regrouping would be far wiser than provoking the entire population. The Spinola patriarch ignored every warning, since many local guards refused to raise their swords against innocent citizens. Umberto simply relied on the Trovan mercenaries hidden among their ranks. Unlike the islanders, those hired killers had absolutely no hesitation about spilling innocent blood as long as they were paid. They charged into the crowd with ruthless efficiency, turning the temple grounds into a horrifying massacre. Even Umberto's closest advisors desperately begged him to stop, warning that murdering civilians would destroy what little reputation their family still possessed. The old man coldly dismissed the concern. Reputation meant nothing to a dead man. In his mind, once the floating archipelago became another Trovan production base, the three merchant clans would survive only by becoming obedient hunting dogs. As terrified, local soldiers watched the Trovan mercenaries butcher defenseless men, women, and children wearing the exact same uniform they did. Many finally realized the truth about who they had been serving all along. Despite the overwhelming violence surrounding him, Marty refused to abandon his position. If the people were risking their lives to defend hope, then he would stand beside them until the very end. The civilians followed his example, refusing to retreat, even as deadly spears and swords closed in around them. Just as tragedy seemed inevitable, salvation arrived from an unexpected direction. Antonio Spinel crashed into the battlefield alongside the Black Skull resistance, intercepting the Trovan mercenaries before they could slaughter even more innocent people. His elite fighters immediately began cutting through the enemy while shielding the civilians behind them. Seeing his own son standing against him sent Umberto into a furious tantrum, calmly advancing through the battlefield while effortlessly parrying attacks aimed at him. Antonio confronted the father he had long since abandoned. Umberto couldn't understand why Antonio would willingly throw away his position as heir to protect common people. Antonio answered with nothing but disgust. He couldn't stomach the fact that his own father had sold out the floating archipelago to the Trovans, and was now murdering the very people he was supposed to protect, just to preserve his own life. Filled with determination to erase the sins of his bloodline, Antonio ordered every Black Skull fighter to prioritize civilian safety, while driving every last Trovan mercenary off the battlefield. His battle cry instantly lifted the spirits of both the resistance and the frightened citizens. Even so, everyone understood the harsh reality. The Black Skull resistance remained heavily outnumbered and outmatched. If the battle dragged on much longer, they would eventually be overwhelmed. Their greatest hope now rested far beneath the ocean, where Theo continued his mission completely unaware of the desperate struggle unfolding above. Deep beneath the sea, Theo found himself surrounded by an enormous army of sea serpents. At first, he remained cautious, puzzled that none of the creatures showed any intention of attacking despite having countless opportunities. Instead, they simply circled him curiously, carefully observing his every move. After watching them for a while, Theo reached a conclusion. The aura of Leviathan sealed inside Bamung must be calming the beasts. Trusting his instincts, he slowly extended a hand and gently patted the snout of the nearest serpent. Immediately, the system notified him that the sea serpents had acknowledged him as their new master. Apparently, the wyvern taming abilities he developed with Umbra also worked on underwater draconic creatures. Just like before, Theo felt their emotions flowing directly into his dragon heart as an intimate bond formed between them. Through that connection, he experienced lingering fragments of Leviathan's own emotions: curiosity, fear, loneliness, and admiration. The sea serpents had originally gathered around the legendary guardians of Men's Manor, eventually claiming these waters as their territory. That explained why they had approached Theo so peacefully. To them, the aura radiating from Bamung felt identical to the presence of their former master. Now capable of understanding them, Theo finally learned what had truly happened. Beneath the floating archipelago, without hesitation, he climbed onto the back of one of the giant sea serpents, and the entire swarm immediately escorted their new master toward the depths. As they descended farther into the abyss, the surrounding currents became increasingly violent. Twisting streams of mana churned the ocean into a deadly maze that no ordinary diver could ever hope to navigate. To avoid missing anything hidden within the darkness, Theo activated hatchling synchronization, dramatically sharpening his senses. Eventually, the raging current suddenly ceased. Resting peacefully on the ocean floor before him was the legendary Leviathan itself. Even asleep, the relic guardian's sheer size was overwhelming, while the immense mana leaking from its colossal body dwarfed anything Theo had ever encountered before. Yet something immediately felt wrong. Unlike the pure mana of every other relic guardian Theo had met, Leviathan's energy was strangely distorted. Sensing the same thing, Griffin finally emerged from hiding, visibly disturbed by the guardian's condition. Even the usually composed fairy dragon agreed with him this time. She believed Theo had already noticed the cause because he carried the same tainted aura deep within his own soul. Theo silently nodded. The answer was now painfully obvious. Leviathan hadn't simply fallen asleep. The legendary guardian had spent so long submerged beneath corrupted mana that it had become infected by demonic corruption itself. That corruption was disrupting the natural flow of mana beneath the floating archipelago, creating the unstable currents and enormous tidal waves that now threatened to destroy the islands. If Theo couldn't free Leviathan from that corruption, neither the Guardian nor the floating archipelago would survive much longer. Elsewhere on the floating archipelago, a secret meeting unfolded inside a secluded place of worship. Noel, the ninth vassal of the. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pi grow naturally. Trovan clan arrived to confront one of his supposed allies about the ongoing war between Ragnar and Trovan. Waiting for him was the barefoot powerhouse Bardian, who greeted Noel with his usual carefree grin. The two had formed an alliance out of mutual benefit. While Trovan occupied Ragnar's attention with a full-scale war, Bardian was supposed to seize the northern territories, allowing Trovan to quietly annex the floating archipelago without interference. Barian casually insisted that he had upheld every promise he made, but Noel wasn't interested in jokes. His patience had already run out. Theo Ragnar's sudden appearance on the archipelago had thrown every carefully prepared plan into chaos. Noel found it impossible to believe that another heir to the throne like Barian had failed to notice such a dangerous rival entering the battlefield. As that atmosphere grew heavier, Noel unleashed an overwhelming wave of murderous intent, making it clear that if Barian continued pretending to know nothing, their partnership would end immediately. Whether Barian was lying or not no longer mattered. Noel had begun questioning whether he could trust his ally at all. Meanwhile, deep beneath the ocean, Theo studied the sleeping Leviathan more closely after discovering the true source of the Guardian's suffering. The legendary sea dragon had been completely infected by a terrifying demonic sea poison. The corruption had spread throughout its enormous body, consuming both its flesh and mind over countless years. Judging from its unstable condition, Theo concluded that Leviathan had already lost most of its reason and was only moments away from going completely berserk. Although he lacked solid evidence, he strongly suspected the Trovan clan had engineered this catastrophe. The fairy dragon explained that under normal circumstances, removing Bamung from its seal should have awakened Leviathan to defend the floating archipelago. The fact that the Guardian remained asleep, despite the relic being restored, meant someone had used an unnatural method to suppress it. Even the Guardians couldn't understand how ordinary humans had managed to poison a relic Guardian so thoroughly. Whatever technique had been used was grotesque beyond imagination. The safest option would have been observing the situation from a distance while formulating a strategy. Theo, however, had never been the cautious type. Drawing Bamung, he charged directly toward the sleeping Guardian before it could fully notice his presence. Activating hatchling synchronization, he sharpened his perception until he finally pinpointed the origin of the corruption. The poison had crystallized into a single source, located directly on Leviathan's forehead, where it continuously spread deeper into the Guardian's brain. Destroying that crystal would likely free Leviathan from its suffering. Theo swung Bamung with everything he had, aiming straight for the crystal. Just before the blade could make contact, an invisible force violently stopped the attack. A powerful protective ward repelled him with overwhelming force, sending him crashing helplessly across the seabed. The impact nearly crushed him beneath countless rocks. Theo immediately realized his mistake. Whoever poisoned Leviathan had also installed a defensive barrier, specifically to protect the source of the corruption. Although discovering the weak point was good news, the failed attack came with a devastating consequence. Leviathan finally sensed Theo's presence. The colossal Guardian erupted into motion, its massive body stirring the ocean floor and creating violent underwater storms, powerful enough to reshape the currents. Escape was no longer an option. Before Theo could think of another plan, Leviathan opened its enormous jaws as unimaginable energy gathered within its mouth. A devastating beam, capable of leveling entire cities, erupted toward him. Theo barely escaped the blast radius by the narrowest of margins, while desperately evading the Guardian's attacks. Inspiration suddenly struck. He retreated to create some distance, buying precious seconds to rethink his strategy. At that perfect moment, one of the sea serpents he had tamed earlier rushed to his rescue. Riding atop the massive creature dramatically improved Theo's underwater mobility, allowing him to maneuver far more freely through the crushing depths. Without hesitation, he ordered the serpent to charge directly toward the corrupted crystal. Once more, the closer Theo approached Leviathan's forehead, the denser the demonic miasma became. Once he reached striking distance, he leaped off his mount and activated every enhancement available to him. Remembering everything he had learned during his battle with Griffin, Theo pushed himself beyond his normal limits. His eyes turned black and crimson, while draconic features spread across his body. One by one, his guardian relics empowered him. Griffin unleashed its suppression ability against stronger opponents. The fairy dragon reinforced Theo's resistance against demonic corruption. Flame Eater drastically amplified his offensive power to counter the poison, while the lesser drake released an overwhelming aura of fear to suppress the guardian further. Only the power of fellow guardian relics could hope to challenge another relic guardian. Gathering every ounce of strength into a single attack, Theo unleashed the perfected technique known as the Dragon's 5 Talents. The combined power of every guardian allowed his strike to pierce straight through the protective wards surrounding the crystal. Refusing to stop, Theo poured everything he had into the attack until the corrupted crystal finally shattered apart in a massive underwater explosion. The shockwave echoed across the ocean floor as the source of the demonic sea poison was completely destroyed. Moments later, Leviathan's own mana immediately began purging the corruption from its body. Light slowly returned to the Guardian's eyes as clarity replaced madness. Still dazed after countless years of corruption, Leviathan looked upon Theo and, for a brief moment, mistook him for Kriemhild herself. Theo gently introduced himself as Bamon's new master, and explained that he had come carrying the hero's final message. Listening quietly, Leviathan relived every precious memory it had shared with Kriemhild before mourning the fact that her lingering soul had remained behind solely for his sake. Before the emotional reunion could continue, Griffin impatiently interrupted, urging Leviathan to immediately return to Bamon and resume its duty as the relic's guardian. The fairy dragon also vouched for Theo, insisting he was the true chosen one worthy of inheriting their strength. Sadly, Leviathan quietly shook its head, although it had long waited for someone like Theo to appear. Returning to the relic was no longer possible. By abandoning Bamon of its own free will centuries ago, Leviathan had permanently forfeited its status as the relic's guardian. Worse still, while Theo had cleansed the corruption clouding its mind, the poison had already inflicted irreversible damage upon its body. Its physical form would soon disappear forever since there was no way to reclaim its old duty. Leviathan proposed another solution. Before fading away, it wished to entrust every last drop of its remaining power to Theo. The Guardian warned him that absorbing such immense power would be unimaginably painful, and that very few people could survive the process. Theo accepted without hesitation. His unwavering confidence pleased Leviathan immensely. The sea dragon had only one request: that Theo used this overwhelming power to protect the people Kriemhild had sacrificed everything to save. Theo solemnly swore upon Balmung that he would fulfill that wish. Satisfied, Leviathan thanked the Chosen one final time before its gigantic body dissolved into pure energy, finally allowing its soul to reunite with Kriemhild. The moment Leviathan disappeared, however, the ocean currents supporting the floating archipelago immediately weakened. Without the Guardian, the islands would soon sink beneath the sea. Realizing there wasn't a second to waste, Theo dove into the enormous vortex containing Leviathan's remaining power and desperately grabbed hold of the crystallized energy. His plan was simple: absorb Leviathan's strength and personally move the entire floating archipelago to safety. Unfortunately, the moment the transfer began, Theo was reminded just how overwhelming a relic guardian truly was. His flesh began tearing apart under the unbearable pressure as Leviathan's power flooded into his body. Even after all his previous experiences, Theo had drastically underestimated the difference between Leviathan and the other guardians. The raging vortex completely dwarfed him. At this rate, his body would be destroyed long before he absorbed even a fraction of the sea dragon's strength. Sensing Theo's struggle, Leviathan's voice echoed one last time, reminding him to use Balmung. Theo immediately drew the legendary sword and redirected that energy through the relic, instead of forcing it directly into himself. Because Balmung had once housed Leviathan, it naturally stabilized the transfer, dramatically reducing the stress. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Up High. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.